What's up everyone? In this issue of Motive Garage, we're going to give you an update on our R32 GT-R Project Supercar Killer. Now for this episode of Motive Garage, we're going to do things a little bit differently. Now we're getting a lot of messages and a lot of comments lately asking for our next update on Project Supercar Killer. And the reason it's taking so long is a couple of things. Firstly, well, I have a day job. Our video production company, Jet Multimedia, has been growing this year. We've been covering more events for customers. We've got more corporate clients. We've been running more of our own events as well. So obviously running the day job comes first, as Motive Video YouTube channel still essentially is a passion or hobby business, and I still have to pay for our project cars. So got to do the work to pay for them. And the more serious they get, well, you know how it goes, the more they cost. Secondly, obviously now that the car's more serious, there's just been a lot of little things that need to be developed. We've had a few little problems along the way, and it's just taking a little bit longer than we'd hoped, but we're just as frustrated as you. So today, rather than shoot on the big cinema camera and then spend a couple of days editing with voiceover and music, we thought we'd try this one a little bit different and just go vlog style. Let's go. Okay, first up, let's start with the engine bay. Now, if you haven't seen the video about the engine that we built, we did a full feature on exactly what's inside our 2.6 litre engine. You can go and check that out if you want to find out more. Let's talk about what's changed since our last video. Well, firstly, we ran out of fuel. The 1650cc injectors were maxed out, so we're now using a Bosch 2200cc injector, thanks to the guys from Bosch Motorsport Australia. And we're also using a Bosch air temperature sensor. Goes into the factory position and it suffers less from heat soak inside the factory inlet manifold, which means it gives a more consistent and better reading, which is better for tuning. What else have we changed? When we went to Cootamundra for runway thrash, we found that these fittings, the press-in fittings, were pushing out. So we sent the rocker covers to FabTech so we could get weld-on fittings put on, so we don't have that problem anymore. We also made a couple of revisions to our catch can setup as well, just to help with breathing. The big problem that we're having is 9,500 RPM is our current max RPM. And as you can imagine, those sort of RPM for 5 gears in a row does get a lot of oil into the head. So if you want to work out how to control the oil setup in your car, make sure you watch our video on how to fix RB oiling problems, and you can learn more about that. Now, before we talk about what happened on the dyno and at runway thrash, we'll talk about what else has changed on the car. So let's have a look at the interior. As you know, we put a race seat in. We've now sold our 34 seats. We're going to get another Velo seat for this. The R34 steering wheel has gone, replaced by a Sparco steering wheel with a quick release as well. All right, let's head to the passenger side now and check out probably the biggest change to this car since you last looked. And that is, we now have a Haltech Elite 2500 in the car, and it's mounted nicely up under the dash like that. So why did we switch from our Haltech Platinum plug and play to the Elite 2500? Well, we're going to do a whole video on exactly why we did that and all of the benefits of changing. But essentially, the car's a lot more serious than it used to be, so we needed a more serious ECU. The Platinum had been in the car since 2013, and we needed to upgrade for obviously better control over a more serious engine, for using better sensors as well, such as a trigger kit, because we have such high RPM on the car now. We also wanted to have closed loop flat shift, we wanted to have better lambda control, we wanted to have more sensors, we wanted to have more safety functions, but we'll go all through that in a totally separate video. But all I will say is this, the Elite 2500 was definitely worth the upgrade for our GT-R. So another thing that held up the development of our GT-R was the rear differential. One of the only things in the car that hasn't been replaced or upgraded or whatever since I bought it. Had the car since 2011. And it's had a factory diff in it the whole time. It simply just wore out. Nothing essentially wrong with it. It was just going single pegger. So we pulled the diff out, had it refreshed, rebuilt to factory spec, maybe a little bit tighter, because they're a great diff from factory, mechanical LSD in them already. So all we did was rebuild that. Once that was done and the Haltech was done, we put the car on the dyno, and check this out. So since the last time our car was tuned at Croydon Racing Developments, they've gone and got themselves a hub dyno. Their old dyno basically started playing up, so who knows what the power figures were doing on that dyno towards the end, but we're basically starting fresh with comparisons on the hub dyno. Now I will say this, a hub dyno does read higher than what the chassis dyno does. By how much? Well, mainlines say anywhere between 5 and 15%, depending on the car, the drivetrain, etc. So our R32 GT-R, we did expect with the hub dyno that we would read obviously not only higher because the car makes more power, but higher because it's on a hub dyno as well. This is the first time the car's been on the dyno with this build that we haven't had a problem, to be brutally honest, and it felt pretty good to watch the thing go past 9,500 RPM. In fact, Jim has the limiter set at 10, but we actually purposely pull timing out after 9,600 RPM to smooth out the power curve so it never really hits rev limiter at all. And man, what a noise it makes. So we kept turning the power up on the dyno and we got to just under 800 horsepower at the rear hubs on a little bit over 30 PSI up top. It does spike in the middle. And then we pulled the air filter off and put on one of our carbon bell mounts and made an extra 20 horsepower and got ourselves to 820. A couple of more tweaks and we ended up with 840 horsepower at the rear hubs. I'll be honest with you, I thought we'd see more like 900 with the new rear housing on the turbo, as it had made nearly 800 at all four wheels on the chassis dyno before, except it did that on 35 pound with spraying nitrous on the intercooler, and who knows if that dyno was reading correct at the time either. But now on the hub dyno, we're making between 820 and 840 rear hub horsepower. We think the bigger rear housing we've put onto this engine isn't making any more top end power, but it's certainly making more mid-range power. This thing is a weapon in the mid-range. Heaps of grunt, to the point where Jim has to sort of tone down the boost curve and make it not so aggressive because you can crush bearings and break things if you have too much torque in the mid-range. So mid-range is improved, but the biggest thing is because we've got the new head setup on the car and the bigger rear housing, the engine's now more efficient, so it's probably not making any more power than it used to on that last engine that we built for this car last year, but instead of making that on 35 pound and having to spike it and give it everything, it now makes 840 rear hub horsepower on 31 pounder boost up top. A little bit more on the mid-range, but about 31 PSI up top to make that power. Now, Jim said that this car could keep making power up top, but essentially the turbo is just out of flow. We've maxed it out. It's only rated to 950 engine horsepower with a 1.3 rear housing on it. We've got a 1.15 and we're making, 840 at the rear hubs. What's that at the engine? Call it 900. So we're right at the end of the turbo's efficiency. We could probably squeeze a few more horsepower, but it's just not worth it for the increased intake air temps we're going to get and how inefficient it's going to be. There's just no point squeezing it that hard. So the old setup made probably the same power, but 35 pound and squeezing everything we can out of it right on the edge. While this setup is doing that sort of power on 31 pound, it's doing it easily, and it's got a great power band, as you can see from the dyno graphs, from as little as 3,200 RPM all the way through to 9.5. It's got a great, massive power band, and the thing is, well, it's just a weapon with a power band like that. So if we want to make more power from here, essentially, we're going to have to change turbochargers. This turbo isn't going to make any more power no matter what we do with the rear housing, because we're restricted by the dump pipe outlet size of the housing and the actual physical rear wheel size. What are we going to go to next? Potentially a G35, maybe a G42, depends what we decide to do. But the fact that we can make 840 rear hub horsepower with this turbo, and it's as responsive as it is and has the mid-range that it does, it's a perfect turbo for a GT-R street car. So we might keep it for a little bit longer before we do upgrade turbochargers. So with the car finally behaving itself on the dyno and things looking good, we took the car to Cootamundra for Tuner's Edge runway thrash so we can see what the performance is like in the real world. Now, as many of you probably know, you can have things happen at the track or on the street that just simply don't happen on the dyno. Now, 9,500 RPM puts a lot of oil into the head in an RB, and on the dyno for one pass, that's fine, but 4 gears in a row at Cootamundra, and we had a little bit of blow-by problems with our GT-R. Wasn't blow-bys in the engine's breathing, just the amount of oil that gets trapped in the head when your revs are all up around 9,000 RPM for 4 gears in a row, and we just couldn't get it back into the sump quick enough. And our catch can design has since been changed a little bit. We've changed the breathing a little bit on that, and it's now improved. But that was a problem at Cootamundra. The other problem we had at Cootamundra was boost control. We have a 12 or 14 pound spring in the car, and we have a 4-port boost controller. On the dyno was fine. However, we were struggling to make boost in first gear. Because I had always driven this car just off the clutch and using a bit of handbrake, I've never needed 2-step. But with the 4-port boost controller, I just couldn't make enough boost off the line, which meant I either had to drive the car mega aggressive and get wheel spin, or it would bog like this. Now, because the car would either bog or wheel spin, I wasn't really able to get a very consistent launch, and my GT-R did to me what it's done many times before and said, no, you're not getting your 9-second pass. So a 10.0 was the best I was able to manage at Cootamundra. So between the boost problem and the breather problem, we decided after a few runs to leave it. We brought it back here. We've now sorted out the breather problem, and we are now going to be taking it back to Croydon to work on putting a 2-step into the car so we can launch the thing properly and get ourselves some quicker numbers.